It's the end of the day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Well, don't forget this week I'm going to Orlando. I'll be at IT Nation, but today I wanted to get out my presentation on Ricoh's first half of FY 2022. Sharp Electronics also published their first half numbers. I'll do that video later this week. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking at Ricoh's financials. I'm thinking about Konica Minolta's financials for the first half of 2022 and even the last few years. And I'm starting to think to myself that there's a big lesson that Ricoh and Konica Minolta can be teaching our industry, especially these other friends of mine that want to move into these broader services. And the question is simple. Where's the profit? Where's the increased profit in delivering these broader services outside of print? Because both Konica Minolta and Ricoh have been doing this in the biggest way, if you will. We all know that, right? And they've been really going out into the marketplace for a decade plus, delivering these broader services. But yet, when you look at the financials, these two organizations bring the least amount of profit. And that's very, very concerning. And until these organizations, and all the organizations in the space as far as that goes, start defining the profitability of these other services, I don't think these other services are ever going to be as profitable as they're supposed to be. Because I believe we're still in this rob Peter to pay Paul. I believe we're still in there. Let's just chase all kinds of revenue at all kinds of cost. And now we need to be collecting profit. We need to be collecting profit. Other days we might wake up and find out we don't have enough profit to get us through this challenging time. And folks, that's not a good place to find yourself. So without any further ado, let's jump on the Sharp Interactive board. So the top line revenue for Ricoh for the first half of FY 2022 is $6,640 million. And they did $159.6 million in operating profit, which was 2.4%. 2.4%, definitely above the line, right? It's pretty good operating profit the times we're in. But ladies and gentlemen, we need to be 4 or 5%. I mean, 1.3, 1%, above the line, below the line. Too much, there's not enough frequency. And we got to get this thing frequent. And the only way we're going to get it frequent is to pay closer attention to our cost. That's just what I believe. Let's look at their forecast. They raised the revenue forecast. They want to do $14.3 billion in top line revenue, and they want to have a $580 million operating profit, which would be 4%. And ladies and gentlemen, that'd be fantastic. But I really don't believe they can get there. And I'm not trying to, jinx them. I'm just trying to look at this holistically and realistically. I don't know how they're going to get there. And when I look through the financials and I looked at how they present the revenue and the operating profit of some of these different groups, I get a little bit concerned. So let me share my reasons why I don't believe they're going to get to this 4%. And why we really need to start putting pressure on not only Konica Minolta, not only Ricoh, not only Xerox, but all the OEMs to be more forthright in their profit ability of all these non-print related products. It is so important for our industry as dealers start looking at transitioning and adding other services for their own deliverable. How are we going to all do this properly if we don't learn from each other or we learn as an industry? But let's talk about this. Right now, for the first half of 2022, Ricoh's sitting on $160 million in operating profit total. They want to get to $580 million. They need $420 million more. Okay, let's translate that to yens. Right now, they're sitting on 23.4 billion yen for the 2 quarters. Okay, I went back to 2019 and quarter by quarter. Folks, they've never had 2 quarters in a row that exceeded what they need for the last 2 quarters of this year to hit the 85 billion yen. So you got to ask yourselves, what's changed since before COVID in 2019? What's changed? How are they going to do this? Because if you go back to 2019, it was the first and second quarter. Those were their best quarters for operating profit. The first quarter of 2019, they had a 5.8% operating profit of 27.5 billion yen. The second quarter, they had 21 billion yen. You put those two together, that's 48.5 billion yen. They need 61.6 billion yen to get to the 85. Can they do it? It's going to be a struggle. And I really don't see in their financials and the way they talk about the business that a lot of stuff has changed to help them do that. And they still don't clarify the profitability of these services. I will say this about Ricoh. They put a fantastic presentation together. It's extremely detailed. It's just missing the stuff I want. And sooner or later, it's not just going to be me that wants it. The investment community, those financial analysts are going to start figuring this out as print continues to decline, and they're going to be putting pressure on these folks to share more of this information around these services. I'm telling you, the days are coming. This is a slide where they talk about their performance and the good, the bad, the ugly, but what I wanted to point out on here was they talked about how they've acquired some companies in Europe, they acquired some companies in Americas to help them in the services space, and they're getting synergies together, and all this stuff's going to be wonderful. But at the end of the day, I don't really care about the synergies of companies coming together. I care about the synergies of the profit you get from the companies that come together. What are the synergies of the profit coming together when these companies come together? We got to quit chasing revenue, and we have to catch some cash, and we have to catch some profit, and we better do it quickly. This is a slide of the Ricoh Digital Services, and I want to break out some of these groups. And folks, there's some interesting things that I've discovered as I did this. So this is Ricoh Digital Services for the first half of 2022. And in Ricoh Digital Services, we have office printing and office services. And they break out the revenue. Office printing, office services. Let's talk about that first. Office printing for the first half of 2022 is at $2,868,000,000. Office services is at $2,079,000,000. Pretty close to the same number. You're thinking to yourself, that's pretty good. Let's look at the operating profit for that group. The operating profit is $66.8 million. Well, that's 1.3% operating profit. But here's the problem. They separate out the revenue, but they don't separate out the operating profit. It's just logical to me that if you can separate the revenue from the office printing to office services, and you know what the revenues are, you ought to be able to know what the profit. I mean, why can't we get the profit? Which one of these is sucking down the other one? Which one's doing better than the other one? Folks, I think it's so important for us to get these operating profits dissected by these different deliverables. Otherwise, we're never, ever going to improve. Let's look at this geography of Office Printing Group. I found this kind of interesting. So in Japan, we did $928 million. In Europe, we did $635 million. In the Americas, we did $448 million. And I realize we got all kinds of problems going on with this yen and everything else. But folks, we got to know what the service costs are. Could you imagine? I mean, we share all the revenue numbers. Could you imagine if we understood what the operating profit is in the services business in Japan versus Europe versus Americas? Are we seeing anything different going on in parts of the world? What can we learn from other parts of the world? I don't think all this is a big secret. The reality of it is, I don't think we're managing it to that level. And if we're not managing it to that level, that's probably why we're bringing in these low operating percentages. Just my thinking. Let's look at the Ricoh Graphics Communication. And folks, this is an interesting group. So this is industrial printing and commercial printing. For the first half of 2022, it looks pretty good. Let me read you the numbers. So the revenue for industrial printing was $110 million. The revenue for commercial printing was $632 million. They had an operating profit of $26 million or 3.5%. On the surface, you're thinking, hey, that looks pretty great. But ladies and gentlemen, there's something in this group that's kind of interesting to me. And I want to share my thoughts on my next slide. I wanted to go back. And I wanted to look at commercial printing and industrial printing since 2017. And folks, it's been a pretty complicated story, to say the least. From 2017, 2018, and 2019, guess what? They separated out the revenue and the operating profit between industrial printing and commercial printing. When we got into 2020 and 2021, and of course the first half of 2022, guess what we're not doing anymore? We're not separating out the operating profit between industrial printing and commercial printing. We're lumping it all together. And that's concerning to me. Because when I looked at this group, folks, this is 5.5 years worth of revenue and operating profit. Okay, I'm going to give you some numbers that are going to just freak you out. 5 years of revenue for the commercial printing and the industrial printing, total $7.9 billion for the 5.5 years that were so far from 2017 till now. That generated $116.3 million in profit. That is borderline nuts. It's just not enough. And the question is, what's going on in this space? The other question is, why did we once separate out the operating profit, but now we brought it back together? Which one of these groups is supporting the other group? What are we trying to run from here? The bottom line, folks, is you got consultants out there that are still banging that drum telling dealers to get into production. You got some dealers thinking about getting into industrial. We all know as an industry that the OEMs deliver that the best. I mean, that's the rumor anyway. When you look at these numbers, you would question that statement. But at the end of the day, is it the deliverable itself? Is the deliverable of industrial and commercial high-end print so bastardized in the marketplace that it's impossible to make money? Even though, if you look at this first half, let me just share the total numbers with you for the first half. They did in industrial print, they did $110 million. Commercial print, they did $632 million. And they had a total operating profit of the $26 million. Right? So think about it. Well, Ray, what are you talking about? We're doing okay now. Is it a fluke? Why do we have so much operating profit? Ladies and gentlemen, what's the reason? Because consistently, it's not been that good. And I think we need to understand what the reasons are before we jump up in the air and get all excited. This next slide is the Ricoh Industrial Solutions. And look, folks, it's $2 million loss for the first half of the year on $452 million in revenue. And that revenue is between the industrial products and the thermal section. And I don't know. We just don't seem to make any money here. And, what's the aspirations for Ricoh going forward with that? The group called Other, I brought this up before. Anytime you name a group Other, they're probably the last one, right? Oh, by the way, now let's talk about Other. Ladies and gentlemen, $27.2 million loss for the first half of 2022. We had losses in 2021 for the first half. What are we doing with this thing? I mean, we're in some rough times, right? We're in some rough times. This is probably the best slide on the whole presentation, because this slide kind of goes back to the conversation that Ricoh had about a year and a half ago, maybe. Remember when they told the whole world we're going to be a services company? And most of our revenue is going to come from services outside of print. The whole world went nuts. I just laugh every time I think about that. Because Ricoh, you were so spot on with your messaging. Your aspirations are right. We want to be a digital services company. But I want you to look at this slide and really think about what I'm going to say here. This is how Ricoh sees themselves in the market and where they're going. So they see themselves as this office equipment manufacturer, and they want to go to this digital services company. I want you to think of the impacts of that. Maybe Ricoh's going to outsource all their manufacturing. Is it time? Maybe Ricoh really is serious about doubling down on the services business. But if they are serious about doubling down on the services business, I wish they would quit being influenced by a bunch of old nuts, status quo people that complained to them so loud that they had to go back and tell the world that they really care about print. It's crazy. It's almost like Ricoh's got a split personality. The personality of the future, where it wants to go out there and deliver all these services, and then it has to resort to this personality of the past when it's hanging around all these old copier people. At the end of the day, the digital service is the right direction. The problem is, there's no accountability to the investment community, or to the world for that matter, on what you're actually doing in this services space. And we need to understand the profitability of the services space so we can feel good about it. And I'm telling you, the financial analysts are going to start demanding this information, especially the more we talk about these things. Especially when the analysts start realizing that print really is in trouble. Maybe we start looking really hard at these folks. Folks, those days are coming. They're coming soon. There's the slide. We all remember the pie chart, 60% of our business. Folks, this slide I shared last time I talked about Ricoh's financials. I want to share it again because we all quit doing this crazy nonsense. This is the biggest distraction in our industry. And it's really mind-boggling when I hear major leaders at OEMs talking about this stuff. It just drives me out of my mind. Nobody gives a crap about going back to where we were. Quit talking about it. Nobody cares when people are home, when they're in the office, how they're going to print. This is probably one of the most complicated charts I've ever seen in my life. It took someone a long time to do it. And we're sitting here trying to figure out when print's going to go up because people are going back to the office and when they're not going back to the office. Who cares about any of that stuff? You want to be a true services company, focus on processes to help people not have to print. Focus on processes to help people not have to scan. Focus on processes that those people you're trying to help are going to do those things I just said with or without your permission. Be the OEM that says, you know what, we're going to help you do that. And we're not afraid to talk about it. Because doing this kind of stuff is just a distraction. It distracts the people that work at Ricoh. It distracts the customers. It distracts everybody in the world. Nobody gives a crap about going back to where we were. We're talking about going back to 80% of print volumes. That's not even a good thing to talk about. I'd rather be talking about where are we going forward and what are we going forward with. So I want to end this with a few questions. And folks, I'm not going to read all these questions. I just want to sum some stuff up. Let me ask this right off the bat. Do you have a profitability clock, Ricoh? Do you, my dealer friends, have a profitability clock? Do you have things that are on the profitability clock? In other words, when that clock strikes no profit for the last time, I'm done. When it strikes boom, you're done. You get rid of it. What sacred things of the past are you willing to sacrifice to maintain a continuous relevance? Ricoh, is it time you get out of the manufacturing of print equipment and offshore all that to somebody else? Right? Just get rid of it. And focus on selling products into the market space. Is that the future? That allows you to focus on services, not focus on some manufacturing plant. Folks, I think that's the reality for a lot of the products that they sell, especially around the print sector. Maybe they can manufacture some of these other things, but some of these other things better start getting profitable or they won't have a choice. Folks, we really got to start thinking about catching profitability and stop this insanity of chasing revenue. I'll see you all on the road from Orlando, and everybody watching me knows this. Status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck in status quo and have a fantastic day.